Oh, well, good evening to you and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. The song in the background starting us off. Our own Yoruba singers, the early version of Yoruba singers. That was a recording done in 1984 in an appearance in Washington, D.C. The Yoruba singers. You see Ezzy Rockcliffe there when he was young, because he was 40 years ago. And you know, the closest that we have come to an authentic Guyanese song that we know, the Trinidadians and the soca, the Jamaicans reggae, and in the 60s and 70s, Storm Charles and the Syncopators came up with a song called The Boom. It was really a coming together of our Shanto beat, our folk beat, a little bit of calypso, and a little bit of reggae. And you can hear that authentic song there from Yoruba singers. The closest we have come to a Guyanese musical sound. And in those days, the Barbadians played around with something called spooge. You remember the Merry Men from Barbados. But today, all of the musics have come together in one form. Even, soca, of course, is a variation of calypso, the soul of calypso, which is really the coming together of the indigenous calypso sound with a little bit of Indian sound. And Rash Shorty played around with that. Some American soul in there too. Coming up with what we now know as soca, the soul of calypso. Reggae too, is really, the first iteration of reggae was ska, which was that fast beat. And then it slowed down to rock steady. And then we had the conscious reggae that is associated with Bob Marley. And then later on, the dancehall song. But reggae itself was really a fusion of calypso, Jamaican mento, and American rhythm and blues. So it's the coming together of the musics, and to create this authentic Caribbean sound. So Yoruba singers there, I think they've been around now for what, 52 years. So they've grown up with independence, and they still, if you want an authentic Guyanese sound, listen to Yoruba singers. A little bit of Shanto, like I said, a little bit of folk, a little bit of African drum in there, a little bit of calypso, and a tinge of reggae. Tom Charles called it the boom, the boom, the boom, the boom, the boom. Good evening to you wherever you're joining us from. Tonight we're going to be talking with our brother Roysdale Ford, senior counsel, who is the shadow Minister of Legal Affairs. That's what we call it, or Attorney General. You know, there's a distinction the two, you know. The Attorney General is really an officer impartial of party. That's how it started off. The Attorney General is really a public servant that is supposed to be outside of the party apparatus. But Minister of Legal Affairs is really the party legal person. But I suppose over time, the Attorney General has become a partisan position, you know, when these things have changed over time. But Brother Roysdale Ford is here with us, and we're going to be talking about victory in the court, no? Victory in the court. Many of you have complained that we have not had too many victories in the court. And you know, when you're in the opposition, there are not too many victories that you get. Former Prime Minister of Barbados, Owen Arthur, once remarked, being in opposition is hell. It's hell being in opposition. Because in our Westminster model winner-take-all system, the letter of the law gives all the power to the ruling party. But the spirit of Westminster assumes that the ruling party, although winning the election in government, will not monopolize all the political space. So there are underlying assumptions of the Westminster model, the winner-take-all model. For the winner-take-all model to work, it has to be a fusion of the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. The spirit, which says that the opposition is government. The opposition is part of government, because the opposition is part of the legislature, and the legislature is an important branch of government. In fact, under the British Westminster, there is such a thing as the legislative primacy. Some may say supremacy, because you see, the Prime Minister in England is hired by the legislative branch. So the assumption of the Westminster model, it is the legislature that is really the first among equals. The first among equals. So the opposition as part of the legislature is then part of government. Is then part of government. Even the Americans, when they sat down to write their constitution, they did not want a strong executive branch. They put the power in the legislature, in the Congress or the House of Representatives, and the Senate. They did not want a strong executive. It is the legislature, the judicial branch in America. The judicial branch of America was created by the legislature. The founding fathers left it up to the legislature to come up with the judicial structure. So much they had the confidence in the legislature. And of course, we know in America, the legislature passed the the Judicial Act that created the court system in America. So both the Westminster system and the presidential system puts a lot of store in the legislature. And the assumption is that that is where the opposition will exercise governance. What we have seen with the present government is that it has reduced the legislature to become a creature of the ruling party. That is not what the founding fathers and mothers meant. Oh no. The letter of the law says that the speaker shall come from, but it doesn't say. It says the legislature shall elect the speaker. It doesn't say the speaker shall come from the ruling party. You see, it says the legislature shall elect the speaker. And since, we vote along party lines in our legislature, the speaker would come from the ruling party. But that's not what the law says. And since we vote along party line, so it comes from the ruling party. But all the governments up to this one, all the ruling parties, give the deputy speakership to the next party in line, the biggest opposition party. This government has done away with that. So it has stripped the legislature of any pretense at being part of government. But the members of parliament, whether they come from the opposition side or the government side, they're lawmakers. They are lawmakers. They're part of government. That is why the government has to finance the office of the leader of the opposition. But as I have been pointing out, this government has changed all the rules of governance. They've changed all the kind of architecture that we have built up over time. You see, the law has to function both in letter and spirit. A constitution cannot outline everything in detail. There are enumerated powers in the constitution, in which the constitution says clearly, this shall happen, this shall happen. But a lot of what is in a constitution is inherent powers. That is what the constitution wants to happen, but doesn't expressly say it. Or what one can infer from what is written in the Constitution. So express powers are only part of the Constitution. They are inherent powers. What is it the founding fathers and mothers were thinking? So what this government has done, what this ruling party has done, is that it has overturned all the traditions that have come along with our system of governance. Laws and traditions go hand in hand. The British don't have a written constitution, and they've survived for centuries. So when you're talking about enumerated powers, the British don't have a constitution that enumerate powers and a set of statutes that they've put together, and they depend a lot on tradition. Thurgood Marshall, the first African American to sit on the Supreme Court used to say the Constitution is a living document. And he approached his rulings on the bench, on the Supreme Court, with that thesis in mind, that the Constitution is a living document, and that a literal reading of the Constitution could be misleading, because the Constitution, like the American Constitution, written in the 1780s, we are now the 2020s. In those days, America was a slave society. Today, America is no longer a slave society. The Constitution, as Brother Thurgood Marshall is saying, the Constitution has to adapt itself to the changing realities. And here we are in the era of oil. We are no longer a colonial state. We have been through a period of post-colonialism, of what some refer to as neo-colonialism. We are now a grown-up state. We are now being called one of the richest countries in the world. Our constitution, our laws, our system, our legal system has to grow up with the country. That's what I'm saying. And if you look at the PPP, they are stultifying the evolution of our legal system, our jurisprudence. They are stifling it, preventing it from coming up to speed with the changes that have occurred in Guyana, in our region. When we became independent, our highest court was our Court of Appeal. Now we are part of a regional court. That in itself is a fundamental change in our legal system and our legal process. I just wanted to get my 2 cents in. Mark you, I know my place. I am not speaking as a legal expert. I've been trained in political science. But since the law and the courts have played such an integral role in the evolution of politics, as political scientists, we have to have a sense of the law. So you didn't get an expert legal commentary there. It's a commentary on the law from the standpoint of politics. Let me bring in the expert on law and the legal process. Good evening, Brother Roysdale Ford. How are you?
I'm going well, Dr. Hines. How are you?
I am with the struggle, as you have been. And is there anything that I said there that contradicts an understanding of the role of the legal system? And I'm sure there are things that you want to add to that general outline that I gave.
Um, Good evening to your audience. Dr. Hines, there's nothing that you would have said that would be incorrect. But I was particularly interested in the comment that you made that the PPP is stultifying the evolution, the legal evolution, and the jurisprudential evolution of the country. And our citizens need to understand that this is a critical component of their rights system. And as the country grows, their rights will expand. What we see happening here, Dr. Hanks, is the government's preoccupation with domination and oppression. And by approaching it from those two approaches, that will impact, and it has been impacting, on the ability of the country to grow and the institutions to grow. You spoke quite a bit, Dr. Hanks, about traditions, and you're correct to the extent that the British society constitutionally is largely built on conventions that run and last the test of time. And you would recall, Dr. Hines, not too long ago, the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he said that he will breach the convention by seeking to prorogue Parliament at a particular time to prevent certain legal consequences in relation to the accession or departure from the European Union. And you would have seen that the courts intervened in the absence of a written constitution to say that the Prime Minister and the monarch who acts on the advice of the Prime Minister simply do not possess that sort of power. And that was a remarkable decision because it showed clearly that the courts were prepared to stand up to deal with those matters. One of the problems that we face, Dr. Hines, is the timeline between instituting a matter in the High Court and the time it will take to get to our highest court now, the CCJ. The government takes advantage of that period of time, that number of years that it will take, and seeks repeatedly to intervene in the process, whilst at the same time seeking to exploit the delays by seeking to ensure that they continue to act in the manner in which they want to act. And I don't know which matter you want to discuss first, and I realize that my mind is taking me to the parliamentary secretary's case.
Yes,
And
that's where I
this
want
is
to
a
go
this is a
first.
this is a very good example of what we're discussing. Um, Dr. Hines, this is a very important case because it seeks to set in a very clear way what are the parameters and the conditions under which membership could be obtained to the National Assembly. In this particular case, the government, after the March 2020 elections, would have been awarded 33 of the 65 seats in the National Assembly, and the opposition the remaining 32. What the PPP basically decided that they will do is to seek to obtain 2 additional seats.
Mhm.
Now, there would have been previous decisions, including cases filed by Mr. Nandalal when he was in the opposition in the Desmond Morian matter, and there were earlier cases by the Court of Appeal which sought to explain what is meant by the phrase elected member of the National Assembly. It is a phrase that appears throughout the Constitution, and it is also specifically defined um, in Article 232 of the Constitution. And the courts have interpreted this phrase to mean that it applies to any person who appears on a list of candidates, and that list of candidates would have obtained at least a seat in the National Assembly. So the two parliamentary secretaries, Sarah Brown and Vikas Ramkisoon, I believe is his name, their names appeared on the PPP list of candidates. So they were elected members of the National Assembly. And according to the results from GCOM, PPP could only have obtained 33 such seats and not 35. So the PPP decided that they will, in their usual manner, which I believe is deforming the Constitution, stultifying the processes to obtain their particular aim, simply added 2 additional persons as members of the National Assembly, even though they're parliamentary secretaries. Now, the government under the Constitution have power to appoint parliamentary secretaries, but the parliamentary secretaries must not be persons who would have faced the election and be on the list of candidates. So the PPP decided that they were, in fact, going to increase their seats in the National Assembly for persons who would have faced the elections by 2. In the decision of the Court of Appeal, which was a unanimous decision a few days ago, Justice Don Gregory, in a very clear part of her judgment, stated that the government has no power by executive appointment to alter the allocation of seats that emerges from the electorate participating in an election. That is an important and profound statement, because what the government was trying to do was not just simply to get 2 seats. They were seeking to override the results of the elections. to add additional persons into the National Assembly when the law did not permit it, when the Elections Commission's results did not permit it. And, you know, it shows the capacity of the government to be hypocritical and to participate in wrongdoing. Now, Dr. Hines mentioned that this is a case that's seemingly very similar to the previous case where they challenged the
the Morian
appointment
case.
where they challenged the appointment of Mr. Felix and Scott as ministers.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes.
So Nandalal filed that matter in the High Court. He won in the High Court. Justice Chang ruled in the PPP's favor. They appealed to the Court of Appeal. They won in the Court of Appeal. So that would have been 4 judges of our courts, the High Court and the Court of Appeal. Previous to that, the same phrase, elected member of the National Assembly, received judicial interpretation by Justice Kar Singh when he was Chief Justice, and the Court of Appeal upheld that interpretation. So you have 8 judges so far, 8 judges at that point in time. And they decide that they will act completely against the law, deliberately. So when this action was filed by myself, Justice Roxanne Jordan, the Chief Justice, felt that this case was completely similar and on all fours with the existing cases and the existing principles. And she tossed Nandalal's argument out of the door. This was the same Nandalal who was arguing the reverse position. He then appealed to the Court of Appeal. 3 new judges sat here and ruled against him again. At this point, he decided that he's not going to appear himself because this thing is getting technical here now. And as the Attorney General, there are certain consequences that could flow from this sort of flip-flopping in your arguments, but especially in this instance without any substance. So they have now decided that they're going to go to the highest court in the Caribbean, the CCJ, to argue this point. Now, I don't believe that there's any great benefit to be derived from the appeal. It has now been heard by 9 judges in the Court of Appeal and 3 Chief Justices. So it's 12 judges, 12 brilliant legal minds of this country would have sat, considered the positions, articulated, and made a decision. But they're going further. And the interesting reason I want to advance this evening, while it's going forward, and Nandalal will say to clarify the law and all of that sort of nonsense. This is not a case to clarify the law. The law has been cleared in terms of what it says and in terms of judicial interpretation for at least 20 years. What this is about, Dr. Hines, this is about ensuring that the PPP continue to allow these 2 parliamentary secretaries to receive payment and salaries because they are their persons and they want them to receive the benefit of remuneration at the expense of the ordinary people of this country. That is what this is about. And it is interesting, Dr. Hines, that the Speaker of the National Assembly, after the court would have ruled in the High Court, decided that in the face of that he can't keep them as active members of the National Assembly anymore. But you know what he did, Dr. Hines? You would never guess. He decided, and it appears on the Hansard every time and in every minute of the National Assembly since that time, they appear on the National Assembly's records as members of the National Assembly but on leave. Wow. Now, so the High Court would have ruled that you're not a member, right, Dr. Hines? But the Speaker of the National Assembly is complicit with the executive of the day to perpetuate a clear unconstitutionality. So they're recorded as members of the National Assembly on leave. And this continued all the way through to the Court of Appeals rejection of their membership. So I'm waiting to see now as we go forward whether the Speaker would want to continue to maintain this position, whereby he wants to treat them as members of the National Assembly and on leave. But Dr. Hines, the implications of this decision, if the court had ruled otherwise in the way the government wanted them to rule, would have been tremendous. Dr. Hines, imagine on a list of, and this is one of the arguments I believe the Court of Appeal accepted. Imagine, based on the PPP's argument, imagine, therefore, since there's no limit on the number of parliamentary secretaries that can be appointed, you could imagine on the list of candidates where you have sometimes 200 persons
Yes.
whose names would appear on a list.
Yes.
You could easily have, Dr. Hines, 200 persons sitting in the National Assembly on the side of the government, participating in the proceedings, drawing resources from Parliament, and speaking in Parliament. These persons are not allowed to vote. But you could imagine the catastrophe that Parliament could become and how unruly it can become. So the Court of Appeal, I believe, like the Chief Justice, felt that we must keep this thing to a finite number of persons who are allowed once you face the elections. Once you face the elections, you must only be allowed to enter the National Assembly by virtue of your election and
That's
not
right.
by virtue of your appointment.
Appointment. Roysdale, slow down, because there are lots of issues, as you're saying here. First of all, it's only, I think, two election cycles ago, when I was asked by the WPA to represent our interests in the APNU, that I realized that when you're putting up a list of candidates, that you're not putting up 65 candidates, that you can put up 150 people on a party slate. I didn't know that. And I'm sure a lot of our audience doesn't know that. We all assume it's 65 parliamentarians. And so when you are putting up your list of candidates, it's 65. I was shocked that you could put up any number. So that's the first thing here that we are learning here tonight. The second thing that we are learning is the slate is elected, but the people who can participate are those who are extracted. So we're making a distinction here because of this slate system we have. The PR, you put up your slate and the party slate is elected, but you can only extract from that slate the number of seats that you got. Right?
Yes, you're right. You're right.
Yes. And so the fact that the PPP wanted the court to say that any number of people from that list of 100 and something can sit in parliament, it's really outrageous. And this is where I have been talking about the spirit of the law. Senior counsel, take it from there, please.
You see, Dr. Hines, one of the things that they were arguing is in effect that when their misunderstanding or misconstruction of the Constitution would lead to a situation where they were arguing that you only become a member of the National Assembly, an elected member of the National Assembly, when you actually become a member of the National Assembly after taking the oath of office. Now that construction would have redesigned the Constitution.
Yes.
In such a way that, in effect, you are actually elected when you are extracted.
Yes.
And as I pointed out in my written submissions to the court, that these are serious constitutional issues.
Yes.
The Constitution says that the people of the country, by way of election, will elect. So when we go through an electoral cycle and elections would have been completed, the people would have elected by virtue of identifying by a sufficient number of votes, they would have elected the entire list.
Yes.
So those persons who actually enter the National Assembly are the persons who would have been extracted from an elected list.
That's
Every
right.
person would have been elected because the person who's the representative of the list will then exercise that option, that choice, that power, that discretion to identify the number of persons to meet the number of seats allocated to that list. So I told the court, and the Court of Appeal accepted the argument that the person who's the representative of the list cannot be the person who's electing people.
That's right. That's right.
That person is engaging in a statutory and constitutional power designated to them to simply extract the number of names to match the number of seats. So they were saying then that, in effect, my argument would be such that you would have 500 elected members of the National Assembly. And you have 500 elected members of the National Assembly, but they're not in Parliament. They're not in National Assembly. So my argument doesn't make sense. But I pointed out to the court that you must have that number of persons of the National Assembly, because we have no control of the number of lists and the number of persons on the list.
On the list.
So those persons are all elected, but they can't become members of the National Assembly because they must first be extracted. And even when you're extracted, you must first take an oath of office before you enter onto or in the duties of the National Assembly. So I was able to point out to the court that at each step of the way, there were limits and barriers that will prevent 500 persons from all becoming members of the National Assembly. And it would have been controlled by the allocation of seats and the swearing of the oath to become a member of the National Assembly. So this case had serious jurisprudential implications for the country and in terms of our development. But it is yet another landmark decision for lawyers around in Guyana and the Commonwealth to study, but particularly political scientists who want to analyze the mindset of the government in terms of where they see power lying.
Yes.
And for them, power lies by the person who extracts you from the list. It's a remarkable thing, the population may say, Mr. Ford, up in this quoting, this constitutional thing, and we paying attention. But these things are records of the state of underdevelopment in the country at a particular time. And that is why I am committed to doing them. Because whilst it is a record and a direction now, it is a manuscript for generations to come. So that people be able to say that this was the mindset of the government in 2023. This was the mindset of the government. They were so hypocritical. They went back against what they themselves fought for. And these are signs that not only our court system is capable of delivering sound judgments, but I'm concerned about the delay in the times.
Yeah. And you mentioned political scientists and political observers should pay. Two things I want to draw attention to. One is executive tyranny, because here is the executive breaching the separation of powers, because the executive is trying to pack the National Assembly. You of course, the lawyer, so you know about packing the courts. We know about that. But here is the executive trying to pack the National Assembly and using underhand ways ignoring the steps along the way. So that's one. Two, when we look at the voters list and look at the court saying that we cannot throw people off the voters list, that does not mean we cannot throw people off the list of registrants. All right? That does not mean that we cannot prepare a proper voters list. But the government is taking advantage of the fact that you have all these extra 200,000 and more people on that list in order to pack votes for themselves at an election. And it's the same principle I think they were trying to do in this case of packing the House of Assembly, the National Assembly. Speak to that. Speak to the comparative, comparing what they're trying to do there in the national, or were trying to do in the National Assembly, and what they're doing with the voters list.
Well, Dr. Hines, it is very similar because it is all driven from the same mind.
Yes.
The mind to control, the mind to dominate, the mind that we are not going to allow ourselves to be bound by rules, but we will break the rules. We will override them, and we must only be stopped if the opposition decides that they will go to court or they will come up with some mechanism to stop us. So one of the important assumptions, Dr. Hines, and you mentioned it at the beginning of the conversation before I came in, would be the assumptions and conventions under which constitutions are built. And and you will see over and over in this country, under our constitution, particularly under the governance of the PPP, a proclivity, a determination to breach the constitution. Many of the cases, Dr. Hines, that we would have filed, really and truly, in any decent, ordinary, progressive, democratic society, lawyers will not have to go and file them in the courts. And that is one of the reasons why I file these matters, to draw attention to the Guyanese populace psyche of where we are and what is happening around us. So a lot of assumptions are built into the Constitution, a lot of conventions are built in, and you would see over and over again the PPP making sure that they find themselves on the outer limits of what is accepted.
Yes.
Yes. And it is this has not been happening only on this manifestation of their government, but it is part of their DNA. You could look back from 1992 to now. Let us use that, what I would call the modern period of the PPP's existence, and there's always clear tendencies to deviate from the norms and conventions that govern constitutional affairs.
Yes. I mean, every constitution must have one or two elastic clauses, things that you can stretch to their limit. The PPP has turned the entire constitution into an elastic constitution. They're stretching everything to its limits. And if you do not have the judicial review, that is people like yourself going to the courts and asking the court to rule on these matters, we would be a constitutional dictatorship. That is what we are already, a dictatorship in terms of the method of governance. But if persons like yourself don't go to court, we'll be in serious trouble in this country. And I think that is the essence of what you are pointing out. The government would have been giving itself 2 extra seats in parliament through a manipulation of the letter of the constitution, the letter of the law, bearing the letter of the law as assumptions. And they know those assumptions. It's not like they didn't know, because they argue. the opposite when they were in opposition. So they're knowingly messing with the Constitution. And that's a crime. That's a high crime. Knowingly messing with the Constitution. You see what's happening in the United States, huh? Where you have a former president who's prepared to do exactly what these chaps in Guyana are attempting to do, to overturn the Constitution. And I think it's a serious development. I'm so glad that you've come on to really point out the importance of this case. That is why the title of the show tonight, I say victory in the court. There's a victory, because this would have had serious consequences if the court had ruled in the other direction.
Uh, So,
Go ahead.
Dr. Hanks, there's an office established under the Constitution, which we don't pay sufficient attention to, and um, and that is the office of the Speaker of the National Assembly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of the hierarchy of offices under the Constitution, I
Mm-hmm.
believe the Speaker is probably the um, third or
Yes.
fourth.
Yes. Yes.
That indicates the importance of the office.
Yes.
And I'm going to say it tonight on your show, and I've said it many times recently. Mr. Nadir has been an embarrassment to that office. I saw him a few nights ago on Globe Span.
Globe Span,
Trying,
yes.
I don't know if you saw it, Dr. Hanks.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it.
Trying to justify a number of things that he would have done as the Speaker of the National Assembly. I saw him there even trying to justify changes to the Parliamentary Accounts Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you see, these things go back to the conventions and assumptions on which we speak. The Parliamentary Accounts Committee is the body that is established by the Parliament to overview and to have oversight of government spending. That committee of Parliament is expected to function without the control of the majority party in government. The government decided, because they don't want to have any intense investigation over their years as soon as possible during this life of the Parliament, they decided that they will, by resolution of the National Assembly itself, alter the composition of the Parliamentary Accounts Committee. So they require that you must now have two government members to be present and be at the Parliamentary Accounts Committee,
Yeah.
before it is lawfully constituted. My friend Ganesh Mahipal and the chairman of that committee, Jermaine Figueira, and Jaretta Fernandez, my sister, and Mr. Patterson, would have said repeatedly and pointed out that there would have been dozens and dozens of meetings of Parliament, of the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, which would never could have been convened, since this change would have taken place. So I'm using this as another example, Dr. Hanks, to show
Yes.
the fact that this government is prepared to abandon, disregard conventions which are in place not only for the benefit of the opposition, because the opposition is part of government, as you pointed out, and they have to play a serious role in oversight and demanding transparency and accountability, which is the main purpose of this committee. But they are prepared to stymie that and to bring that to an end by altering the composition and then not participating in the sittings of the committee. So, but in terms of the speaker and what he has been doing, Dr. Hines, he has been doing a number of things, all geared at reducing the effectiveness of the opposition by refusing to permit questions that are urgent and in the public's interest, by refusing to allow motions to come before the National Assembly, by seeking to shut down members of the National Assembly from speaking. On the last occasion, the 65th sitting of the National Assembly, the Speaker tried to prevent me, a member of the National Assembly, from utilizing my time, which I have as right to speak in the National Assembly, for calling on the House to stand and to observe a minute's silence for the death of the 20 young children in Madhya. The government walked out of it, and the Speaker tried to stop that. Now, I'm mentioning these things, Dr. Hines, because at the beginning of your discourse tonight, you said clearly that the opposition plays an important role in government. It's part of the government structure. But the Speaker is there not to protect the government, not to stop questions and interrupt and intrude on investigative processes, questions that would explore government's failure. He's not there as a goalkeeper. And I believe that he fails to understand his role. He fails to understand his role. The only time, as far as I recall in recent history, where a Speaker of the National Assembly was appointed and elected who was not a member of a list of candidates would have been in the instance of Dr. Barton Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Barton Scotland was able to function without having any sense of obligation to any party.
Yeah.
He received criticisms from both sides.
Yeah.
But we don't have a speaker like that now. And we don't have a speaker who's prepared to position himself mentally and philosophically in such a position.
Mm-hmm.
He's prepared to subscribe to the will of the PPP. And as I said, Dr. Hines, and I'll say it again, even without the PPP necessarily wanting that sometimes.
That's right.
He anticipates, run ahead, trying to block the shots. And these are things that go to the core nature of the society that we have.
Yes,
because you can't be growing exponentially in terms of economic measurements, and in terms of the constitutional governance of the country, the participation of people in the National Assembly, the inclusivity of the National Assembly, the effectiveness of an organization being blunted and obtruded by a speaker. Those are areas in which we are not doing well, and no amount of oil and barrels of oil will help us to develop. Development is not shiny buildings, new roads, new bridges. That's not development. Development is an improvement in the quality and condition of life of every single citizen in areas that they can touch and areas that they can't touch and feel. Because people can't touch and feel justice, but they could see it. People can't touch and feel the imbalance in the National Assembly or disorientation of the speaker, but they could see it. And that can't be measured in the budget. That can't be measured in terms of the growth of the economy. So there are many countries, as you would know, Dr. Hines, as a tremendous, qualified, and experienced political scientist. There are many countries in the world who would have had tremendous growth rates, and the entire country collapsing into a cesspool. And ultimately, the growth rates come to an end.
That's right.
And
right.
We have to understand that this is where we're heading.
Yeah. In fact, the evidence shows that most of the petro-states, especially those that go from extreme poverty to petro-wealth, what flow from that is dictatorship. Is as if the oil drowns them, and if you look at a lot of the oil producing states, you see that tendency, especially the ones that come from, look at Guyana, from the second poorest country in the hemisphere to perhaps the second richest country in the hemisphere. And if you don't have adjustments in the body politic, in the DNA of the system, we end up where we are in Guyana. And I'm glad you are making the linkage between the legal system and the economy. You don't hear people talk about that. They talk about the economy and the political system, not the legal system. And I'm so glad that you have introduced that dimension here tonight. Because they have to grow, the institutions have to grow up together with the country, or else we will be in trouble. And I think we are facing that right now. They talk about the Dutch disease. There are some other diseases that come with when you become a petrostate. That is not the Dutch disease.
And you know,
Go ahead.
Dr. Just to again support the point that you're making, and this is about an orientation. The government, I believe, at the last budget, or it might be the budget before, in breach of the laws governing the allocation of resources and expenditures to constitutional agencies, decided that they want to determine the budget for these agencies. They want to fix it and determine the amount of money that they should get, including the judiciary and all the service commissions. Again, we had to go to court to have that corrected.
Yes. Yeah.
This is a government that is committed to pursuing an absolute path of domination.
Yes.
The Constitution says that you must submit your budget to the minister. He must accept it. He must proceed with it. And they want to determine the budget, fix it, and finish it off. The instances where this government is engaging in this sort of domination, no amount of one Guyana mantra and repeating could cover it up. You can't airbrush progress. You can't airbrush and create this environment of equality and decency and compliance with the Constitution and jump around and dance on a stage and sing two songs and try to make that into one Guyana. The reality of the country, whether you look at it constitutionally, you look at it from a political economy, you look at it in terms of the quality of life that the people are getting, and you measure it against this One Guyana program, you measure it against what the country can potentially deliver, there's a vast disparity. And the people are not benefiting in any way from this growth that is taking place in terms of figures and in terms of the government's commitment, apparently, to place material stuff, buildings, and roads above the well-being of the Guyanese people.
The Guyanese people, and this
tendency, they want to talk. They want to build new hospitals, but they don't want to pay the nurses better wages.
There you go. And this tendency to
they don't want to reduce taxes.
Yeah. The tendency to do things because the law doesn't say that you can't do them is in the United States, as you know, and I hate to use countries like the United States as examples because, you know, those countries have their serious acts of omission. But the control that the executive has over the judiciary in the United States, they can pack the courts, and the Congress can determine the salary of judges. That's all. Other than that, they don't have any power. And if you remember, some people are encouraging Biden to pack the courts recently, and he said no. He could have done it. Can you imagine a PPP in that situation? They would have packed those courts with PPP judges. You know, Biden didn't do that.
Well, Dr. Hines, we can't say that they won't do it. I want to draw your attention to the fact that the government passed a few months ago a bill to amend the number of judges in the Court of Appeal. And they have then proceeded to constitute the Judicial Service Commission in their image and likeness. So we may well have a situation where the Court of Appeal is suddenly um, constituted with a number of persons that they want to have there.
They want, yes, yes,
And
yes.
they believe that that is justice, right? As I was saying earlier, Dr. Hines, there's a court hire. But imagine the implications of having to wait from 2023 to 2026 to get to the CCJ to overcome the government's court packing, the government's agenda. You get my point, Dr. Hines?
Yes, 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 yes,
So
yes.
by
And
time by
that,
time you even meet to the CCJ, the relevance of the issue and your grievance would have been overtaken by time.
yeah, yeah. And the call for reform, they're taking advantage of the need for reform to create a judiciary in their own image. And that's where they're aiming to go eventually. Roysdale, the other case that you won this past week has to do with the Public Service Credit Union. Tell us what that case was about and what the ruling is and the significance of the ruling.
Um, Dr. Hines, that was a case that would have been filed by members of the Guyana Public Service Credit Union Limited.
Uh,
That stemmed from a petition that would have been filed by members of the credit union asking to have a special annual general meeting to elect a new committee of management. After the petition would have been submitted to the committee, they refused to act on it, and that resulted in a court matter being filed by a number of 3 members, at least, I recall. The court ruled in September 2022 that there must be a new election for to constitute the special through the special general meeting. The court ruled that it must be done in a particular way. It must be held not less than by the 24th of October 2022. It must be done by way of a special publication in the newspapers, and it must be done having a certain virtual component, and moreover, by a particular Trinidadian IT provider providing the virtual component across the length and breadth of the country in all 10 administrative regions. It turned out that the committee decided that they were not going to act in accordance with the court order. They recognized the sanctity of the court order, but applied to have it varied, and the court was going to sit to hear the variation, but they withdrew the variation application and simply decided that they were going to act in a manner inconsistent with the order. On the last occasion, the court felt that on the affidavits before the court that it was a prima facie case that they would have breached the court order, and the court immediately prevented 3 persons, Gillian Pollard, Karen Van Slightman, and Richard Ruth Howard, from sitting and participating any further in the affairs of the committee, and directed that Trevor Ben, Patrick Mentor, and Rajdai Jagannath assume those functions until further notice from the court. But before even the petition came into question in this matter, the government would have made a number of interventions in the activities and the affairs of the Guyana Cooperative Credit Union Limited. The consequence of it, I believe, Dr. Hines, is that this is another example of the government's proclivity and determination to engage in interfering with institutions. So I believe that this was part of the government's plan to disturb and prevent the effective operation of this credit union. It is a multi-billion-dollar credit union that services largely the supporters of the opposition throughout the length and breadth of the country. I believe that this was part of a plan, a careful plan, to disturb the livelihood and the access to opportunities by our supporters. As I said before, I've gone to Berbice and I've seen a number of young women and mothers, largely single mothers, keenly interested in this case, asking me when it will come up in court, when this will be resolved. And I asked them why they were so interested in it. You wouldn't necessarily see the link between a credit union court matter and this sort of battle, but you were able to see the connection when they explained that this is an association that they will go to receive funding to send their children to school, um, to borrow loans to start small businesses, and then you got a clear appreciation that this is an important institution that the government decided by one means or the other that they were going to affect and also ultimately affect the lives of a cross section, a great cross section of people across the length and breadth of the country. Particularly, Dr. Hines, you would not see the government interfering in this manner in institutions and credit unions in the sugar belt. You would not have seen that sort of deliberate, um, wicked act in those credit unions. So I believe that this is an important decision by the court. It seeks to rectify not only the breach of the order, but I believe it places the credit union on a pathway to some regularity in terms of having a committee of management approved by the membership, and ultimately we would hope to see the people, the ordinary members, being able to access loans to improve the quality of their life and to empower themselves.
Senior Counsel Roysdale Ford there, speaking to the two cases that the rulings came down this past week, and I dubbed them victories, not just victory for the opposition side, but victory for the country, because these cases have consequences. As we heard there, um, the court order in relation to the public service credit union has consequences for livelihood, people's livelihood, their children, sending their children to school, etc., etc. Roysdale, a couple of nights ago on this program, the issue of the petitions came up, and people in the audience were asking about the petition. Where are the petitions? Are we going to go to an election without the petition being heard? We've been laboring on this side of the aisle, making the argument that the full narrative of the 2020 election has to include those findings of the recount, that the lopsided narrative of an attempt to rig an election on the part of one party and not take into consideration what came out of the audit of the boxes during the recount. And the Dr. Jeffrey in a letter yesterday or yesterday did point out that CARICOM Observer Team, which is no friend of the opposition, that team said that the recount was an audit. So the elections were pronounced based on a raw count and not on the audit, but the audit that came out, it's there. And the petition is the avenue to bring that evidence. What's going on with the petition?
Um, Dr. Hines, we are currently at the stage of the Court of Appeal. We've completed the arguments, um, I believe it would have been in March 2022, sometime around then.
Yes.
And we are awaiting a decision from the Court of Appeal um, on the decision of this matter on the election petition. Um, you see, Dr. Hines, again, I go back to the question of timing and the efficacy of the court to function. I acknowledge that there are only 3 judges sitting in the Court of Appeal, and we must see these things as part of a wider scheme by the government to achieve a certain type of outcome.
Yes.
There are 3 judges. The judges are under tremendous pressure. So my comments are not an attack on the judge, but it's an attack on the system and the failure of the government to ensure that the Judicial Service Commission was earlierly constituted in an earlier manner and in a more efficient manner, which they failed to do for many years. But coming back to the election petition itself, I agree, Dr. Hines, that there could be no comprehensive assessment of the results of the elections without the question of what happened um, at the recount. The petition that is in the Court of Appeal deals with the recount. It deals with the legislative process that went into the creation of the recount
Yes.
and what powers the Elections Commission sought to utilize to create the legal infrastructure for a recount. We're arguing before the court that the Elections Commission did not possess the power to engage in any sort of recount. And in preparing our submissions to the court, we discovered in the month of March 2022 a decision from the St. Vincent High Court, which was exactly on point. It
Yeah,
dealt
yeah.
with the issue of the COVID regulations,
Mm-hmm.
but it was exactly on point. And so we were able to lay that case over with the court in dealing with the issue of whether the Elections Commission could have exercised the power that it purported to do. I believe that that will be another important decision, and we will be able to um, determine where we go forward. I expect the court to rule in our favor. I see no reason why the court should not rule that GCOM did not possess that power. Um, you know, Dr. Hines, that if the government wins that matter, that we will appeal to the CCJ, and the reverse. Um, if the government rules in our favor, the PPP will certainly appeal. But
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
concerned, Dr. Hines, that with the tremendous delays in terms of time, and I have argued before and I'll argue again that I believe that there's a certain type of case which must be given priority. I believe
Yes.
election petitions are some of them. I believe constitutional matters and administrative law and public law matters must be given priority because they take so long that sometimes in many instances um, the issue is lost. The essence of the issue is lost by the fluctuation of time. I also believe that in some instances, we need to provide by way of legislation for opportunities to leapfrog the Court of Appeal and go directly to the CCJ for a quick and efficient determination. These are things that are not impossible, but the PPP has um, clearly indicated their tendency not to permit it. We had proposed such a measure as a test in the single window planning bill, and the government came down very hard, against it. We can't allow nothing like that. You must first go to the Court of Appeal. You must first go here or that. So they bill and benefit from the delay, which is inherent in these processes.
Yes, and you anticipated the questions that I was going to ask. How can we make the system more effective? There are other things I want to talk to you about. I wanted to talk to you about this proposal that's being floated to abolish the jury system. I wanted to get your thoughts on the Dharamlal case from a legal standpoint. We are not going to be able to get those in tonight, but if you give me a commitment that you will come back in short order for us to discuss some of those matters, because I assure you, my brother, that our audience here has the tolerance. I'm telling you, the numbers are up, and it's 15 minutes past program time, and they have stayed. This is an audience that absorbs what we professionals sometimes call technical issues that we have to break down for people and so on. Without realizing it, we have built up a critical mass of people, citizens who are not necessarily trained in these technical things, but who have a broad appreciation and understanding of how it works, given these programs that we do here every night. So I would want you to come back in a couple of days. Next week is the Emancipation Week, so probably the next week for us to talk about this issue about the abolition of the jury system, to talk about uh, what are the implications of the Dharam Lal case, because I think it has implications for the justice system. I would want to get your views on that, and generally the state of the legal system. And I would not pass up the opportunity for you to tell us what else you're working on in terms of cases that are filed to keep this government in check. So I want to thank you, Roysdale, for coming on tonight and enriching our conversation here. And I give you the opportunity to make any closing statement that you want to make.
I'm Dr. Hanks. I'm happy to be on your show. I think that this is part of the responsibility, not just as a member of parliament, but as a senior counsel and as a citizen of this country, to use your intellect and your experience to inform the citizenry of the country. So I'm going to be here whenever you offer me the invitation. If you know, I responded almost immediately,
Immediately.
and I am going to be back soon as you would like me to be. In closing, I would like to ask the people of this country, the citizens of this country, to remain strong, remain vigilant. There's a lot happening in the country to distract you. Um, Stupid charges are being instituted against members of parliament. All sorts of things are currently unfolding to take away from the embarrassment and the failure that the PPP continues to be almost every day. But Dr. Hines, you just let me know and I'll be happy to return to continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, Brother Roysdale Ford, Senior Counselor, Shadow Minister of Legal Affairs, really living up to the standards that we have built up here for our guests, and the quality of our conversation. You know, part of resistance, part of protest is exactly what we're doing here. Sometimes people think that we have to be licking down the place and carrying on. That is the only form of protest. There are times when that kind of protest and resistance are called for, but there are also times when we have to show a superior grasp of the issues, that we have to provide the country with an alternative discourse, because we are not just opposing a government. In the process of opposing a government, we are really trying to build our country and trying to create an alternative to the government. An alternative to the government. That's what we are doing here. We are in the process of providing this country with another vision, that another Guyana is possible. So we want to take this seriously. And we know that over time, because of the way in which they have attempted to crush our spirit, that we sometimes say too much of talk, too much of talk. But I tell you, it's not the talk, it's what you talk, how you talk, and the objective of your talk. And I always believe in the view that when people don't want you to talk, talk more. There is a reason they want to muzzle you. And as Martin Carter says, the mouth is muzzled by the food it eats. We're not into that. We're not into that. We refuse to be muzzled by the food we eat. And this government is going around the place throwing little crumbs at people. The objective is to muzzle you, to muzzle your mouth, to muzzle your soul, to muzzle your intellect. My erstwhile friend Freddie Kissoon complained that the editor of the Stabrook News called him a PPP lapdog. And he's so hurt by it. I didn't call him a lapdog. He's hurt that the editor of the Stabrook News has called him a lapdog. We are not lapdogs. And we are not socializing ourselves here to be lapdogs. Free people are not lapdogs. Lapdogs are the opposite of freedom. The freedom to speak, the freedom to think, the freedom to construct ideas, the freedom to turn ideas into action and to take action and turn them into ideas. Ideas for liberation and for freedom is what we are about. As my brother, mentor, and elder would say, we take the people's experiences, refine them, and give them back to the people as a form of cultural and political nourishment. I live by that creed. I live by that creed. There's a time when I go into the classroom and I teach in the classroom with walls. And then there's a time to teach in the classroom without walls and to learn from that classroom without walls. That's what we are about. And that's what they don't want. Stay good. The Emancipation Weekend is upon us. It's a time for observation and observances. There is a time, and it is a time for reflection. It is a time to talk about emancipation in the past, but emancipation in the present. There's a time to indict those from whom we emancipated ourselves in 1838, and a time to indict those from whom we are trying to emancipate ourselves from. The present day pretenders, the present day plantation owners, the present day sycophants, the present day non-thinkers, the present day dominators, dominations. We are on the ball. Let this emancipation be a time when we renew our covenant, when we renew our destiny, when we renew our rendezvous with destiny. And our destiny as people who were chained against our will is to break all the chains of bondage and break them not just for ourselves, but for all human beings. And that is why our quest, our journey, and our struggle is a struggle for humanity, is a struggle for Guyana, all of Guyana, including those who condemn us, those who curse us, those who try to ghettoize us as people who are bitter. When we win for them. When we won in 1838, we won for all of humanity. Slavery as a formal system, no more. And when we win against those who would want to impose slavery in another way, we are winning for everyone. Our struggle is a struggle for the conscience of our country, our region, and our world. We say thanks, we give thanks to the survivors of the plantation. And we, the sons and the daughters of those survivors, must carry forth that humanist tradition. Humanist. We are the ones who can answer what it is to be human, what it is to be a people with a soul, but told that we are soulless. We stand toe to toe, foot to foot, as the Congo mother would say, Picnic, Congo, a high nation. Not superior nation, high nation. Our foreparents never taught us superiority. They taught us equality, justice. And they taught us to reach across the aisle. That is when our foreparents came out of those plantations. When some of the plantation owners went bankrupt, they loaned them money. Only people with a human dignity and a sense of the sanctity of humanity could do that. The fact that we walk this world, Black people, African people, and we are not throwing stones all over the place, means that we were always humans and that our human capacity was not crushed by 400 years of bondage, and it will not be crushed by those who want to crush everything in its way. We signal to them that we shall be led by that humanity. We signal to them that those of us like Brother Roysdale and others, in whom our people have invested, our brothers, our sisters, who made sacrifices, our mothers, our fathers, so that we could go to institutions of higher learning. They had a plan. And that plan was, as my auntie always said to me, I send you to school, not just to read and write, but so that nobody can make you a fool. Profound. Profound. Let us go forth. This emancipation and pledge that as we have cleansed this piece of earth, this sacred piece of earth, that is drenched with the blood and the sweat and the sacrifices of all our peoples, that we shall once again rise to the occasion and make this coast and now the hinterland a place of civilization. The burden of civilization has never rested with the powerful. They are destroyers of civilization. The burden of civilization has always rested with the salt of the earth. The salt of the earth. I love you. I love you. And I have to love you profoundly so, because you deserve that love. That love is full of thanks, full of gratitude, because without you, there could have been no Roysdale Ford, no Nigel Hughes, no Aubrey Norton, no Amanza Walton Desir, no David Hines, no Ganesh My Paul. You all made us what we are. And those who have been ungrateful and not giving of themselves in return to our collective struggle shall be judged by the ancestors. But it's not too late. It's not too late for them to join us. Happy emancipation. Happy emancipation. And I shall see you over the weekend, because on Emancipation Eve, we're going to be in Buxton. Big program there. Big program. Some of you have contributed. Thanks for the contribution. And then, as I said, we are taking a big contingent to Buxton on the 10th of August, for the annual EUC Guyana Emancipation Symposium. The theme, centering racial equality in the age of an oil-rich Guyana. We're taking all of our wise men and women there. A show of strength, a show of reason, and a show of community. That's what makes us stick. See you all tomorrow night.